All right, guys, let's talk about the linear equation, the good old y equals mx plus b, this guy right here. This is going to be your new best friend throughout the next several classes here. I got kind of evicted from my room for the day so they can put in a new thermostat, so I'm spending time in the nice cold library. So let's talk about this. So Quizzical Baby says, you mean to tell me m is the slope and b is the y-intercept? Yes, it is. This is our secret code equation. So we're going to jump in and start actually talking about 3 different versions of the linear equation. And there are 3 of them. We have 3. This first one is called point slope form. Y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1, the quantity in parentheses. In this formula, in this form of the linear equation, when we look at the x and the y and the x1 and y1, we're talking about different things here. x1, y1, that is a point that's on the line. And then, as we talked about in our video before, m is the slope. And that's true throughout. So whether it's an m here or an m here or an m down here, m is the same thing. So x1, y1 is a point on the line, m is the slope. X and y stay x and y. Okay, x and y stay x and y. And of course, we're going to be doing examples of this throughout the video, guys. Okay, and yeah, I know it looks awkward with the parentheses, but this is just a derivation of the slope formula, and it's a great way to find an equation for a line if you have a point and a slope, which we'll see in a minute. The next one is y equals mx plus b, and that's the one we were just talking about a minute ago. In y equals mx plus b, the m is the slope, and the b right here, that's the y-intercept. It's the value on the y-axis where the line crosses that y-axis. If you see minus a number, it's a negative y-intercept. If you see plus a number, it's a positive y-intercept. And finally, standard form. Standard form is kind of the weirdo of the 3. In standard form, A, B, and C are all 3 integers. All 3 of them are integers. And you get A and B, if you notice here, they're on the same side of the equation. So all 3 of these are forms of a linear equation, and you can take one line and write each of these different forms. They may look different, but they still represent the same line. Okay, so one line, 3 different looking equations. We're going to write the equation of this particular line right here in 3 different forms. So let's start with the first one, which is the point slope form. So the first thing I want you to do, if you're supposed to write point slope form of an equation, is write down the formula for point slope form, which in this is y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1, the quantity in parentheses. So again, I need 2 things for this. I need a slope, and I need a point on the line. Point on the line, that's easy. We can use any of these 3 points. It would not matter which one you use, your answer will come out correct. I'm going to use the one in the middle, which is 1, 2. For the slope, I need to look at the rise and the run. So in this case, I know my slope is negative, so I'm going to put my negative sign in, and I know I'm going down 2, right 1, my slope is a negative 2. Now I can plug this in for my equation. Y minus the y value of my point equals the slope times x minus the x value of my point. And while it looks awkward and strange, if you're asked to find point slope form, that's it. That's it. Okay, it stays in that situation. And from that equation, you can find a point and a slope. So if all I gave you was this equation, you could graph this line if you think about that. Slope-intercept form can be found 2 different ways if you have a graph. If you already have point slope form, you can take your point slope form and solve for y. So you could take your point slope form and solve that for y. You could also find the slope in the y-intercept. We already know the slope, it's negative 2. The y-intercept is 4. So I can just plug them in. Y equals slope times x plus y-intercept. Now, how is that the same thing as this? If you go through and you solve this for y, you will get this. We'll practice that in class, though. All right, last one is standard form. For the standard form, you're going to take this one up here, okay, and you're going to use slope-intercept form. And what you're going to do is you're going to get both the x and the y on the same side. Let's write down what standard form is. We want the x and the y on the same side. So if I take y equals negative 2x plus 4 and I add 2x to both sides, I've got my standard form. 2x plus y is equal to 4. And that's it. Okay, and I forgot to put a little box around this one. Let me put a little box around this one. 3 different looking equations, one nice basic line. Now we continue on to, here's the graph, now write an equation for the line. Now we just did this, but most of the time when they say write the equation for the line, they are referring to the slope-intercept form equation. So when they say the equation, most of the time that's looking for this one. And the reason that's the most convenient one is that's the button you have on your calculator is your y equals button. And we're going to start getting more and more used to graphing some of this stuff on the calculator. Okay, so for this one, again, I need my slope and I need my y-intercept. My y-intercept is b. In this case, that is negative 2. My slope, rise and run, you want to find some points where you can read the actual points on the grid lines. Having trouble with the gray, so I'm going to change over to black. Find that slope. Find that rise and run. Write that slope. So that's a rise of 3 and a run of 2. So my slope is 3/2. Okay, and my y-intercept over here, we already said, is negative 2 because that's where our line crosses the y-axis. All you have to do now is plug in the values into the equation. You have the slope and you have the y-intercept. So 3/2 x minus 2. Or in other words, y equals 3/2 x minus 2. And that's the equation for that first line. Maybe you want to go ahead and pause it and try the second one, but I'm going to go ahead and do it as well. There's my y-intercept. I have a negative slope, down 1 over 2. Down 1, right 2. My slope is negative 1/2. Slope is negative 1/2. So again, y-intercept, that's positive 3. I have my y-intercept and my slope. All I have to do is plug them in. Negative 1/2 x plus 3. Okay, so no graphs this time. This time I give you a slope and a point and you write the equation of the line. Now again, we're going to stick to generally writing the equation at the end result as y equals mx plus b. But this kind of problem is given to you a slope and a point, right? Well, if you have a slope and a point, or a point and a slope, for that matter, that's point-slope form. So we want to use point-slope form to do the problem, but we'll probably give the answer at the end in slope-intercept form. So let's start off by writing down point-slope form on the paper so we can fill the correct numbers into the formula, into the equation. Okay, y minus, the y value we have right here is 1, so y minus 1 equals the slope times the quantity x minus negative 2. Now look at that very carefully. I'm not going to leave that like that. I need to automatically change that. In fact, I don't actually write that way at all. What I do instead is I write, and I think I may have done this in the slope video, x minus negative 2. Did you see what I did there? What I did was I said x minus, and when I said the negative, I crossed over my minus because that's what minus negative does. Okay, that's what minus negative does. Now I'm going to solve for y. Distribute and then solve. Y minus 1 equals negative 3 times x is negative 3x. Negative 3 times plus 2 is minus 6. We're going to add 1 to each side. So that means y equals negative 3x minus 5. Okay, next one. Slope of the line is 3/4. Okay, a line has a slope of 3/4 and passes through the point 8, negative 1. So y minus y1 equals, notice again I crossed it over, the slope times x minus x1. Now we distribute. 3/4 x and 3/4 of 8. 3/4 x is just 3/4 x, stuck together like that. That's 3/4 times x. 3/4 of 8 is 6, so minus 6. Subtract the 1 from each side. Y equals 3/4 x minus 7. All right, continuing. All right, horizontal and vertical lines, and we're going to go over this some more in class as well. A horizontal line, as we learned before, has a slope of 0. Well, the equation is really easy. It's y equals some real number. And these will always be horizontal lines. And remember, the slope is 0 because the run is infinite, but the rise is 0. So the rise over run, 0 over some number ends up equaling 0. So the equations are y equals some number. Vertical lines have a slope that's undefined, and the reason for that was because it was some number over 0, and that we cannot do. We just cannot do that. We can't divide by 0, that's why it was undefined. The equation for a vertical line is the opposite of the equation for a horizontal line. Instead of y equals, it's x equals with no y. That's a vertical line. Let's try some. All right, so we have 4 vertical or horizontal lines to graph. Let me give you some coordinate planes first. Okay, so I know we just said on the previous slide how this works, that x equals is a vertical line and y equals is a horizontal line. And if you think you just want to run with it, go ahead and pause it and graph them. But if you're not sure, let me show you how you don't have to memorize that. You can just figure it out. Find a point where x equals 4. Well, x equals 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 notches over on the x-axis. And x equals 4 at all of these points, going up and going down. They're supposed to be points, but it's really hard to draw with a stylus. And that's how I know it's a vertical line. All of those points have an x of 4. How about x equals -1? Well, -1 is here for y, but it's here for x. It's a vertical line, not a horizontal. So yeah, we could have a point where y is -1 as well, but what the point is here, what the idea here is it doesn't really matter what y is, x is always -1. How about y of 0? Well, y is 0 on the x-axis. And a y equals line is horizontal because all of the points on that line have the same y value. Every point on that line has a y value of 0. And a y value of 1 would be right here. Because every point on that line has a y value of 1. So that's a horizontal. So to summarize again, x equals vertical, y equals horizontal. Intercepts. The intercepts, again, we reviewed this, we learned this earlier in the year. Intercepts are the points where the line crosses the axes, the x and the y axes. It's super easy on a graph. You're going to do it by actually just finding the points where the line crosses the y axis. So my y-intercept here is -4. And my x-intercept here, right there, is 2. Now you'll notice we talked about y-intercept, that's b. But we don't have a value, we don't have a variable for x-intercept. Don't look for one, there isn't one. It's not something you'll see in one of your equations. It only works for the y-intercept based on what we've learned for y equals mx plus b. But what if you don't have a graph? What if you have an equation? Well, it's actually really easy to find the x and the y-intercepts. Okay? To find the x-intercept, plug in y equals 0. So take your equation over here, and instead of y, replace it with a 0. Now you solve, and you have found the x-intercept. So 3x plus 0 is just 3x. 3x equals 12, divide by 3, x equals 4. So the x-intercept is 4. To find the y-intercept, you're going to do the same thing except x equals 0. So to find the y-intercept, replace your x with a 0 and solve for y in that original equation. 3 times 0 is 0, plus 4y is 4y. Divide both sides by 4. Y equals 3. Y-intercept, x-intercept. So from a graph, you can do it visually. On paper, when you have an equation, you can use plugging in 0 for the other coordinate. Now, why did that work? Well, let's think about the coordinate plane. If an x-intercept is a point that's on the x-axis, every point on the x-axis all the way across has a y value of 0. Hence the y of 0. If we're talking about a y-intercept, we're talking about a point that's on the y-axis, which is here, and every point on the y-axis has an x value of 0, and that's why it works. All right, do not copy this slide. I repeat, do not copy this slide. Stop, read through it. Go back in your notes and make sure you have all 6 of these skills, okay, all 6 of these bullet points of information. Here, make sure you know the 3 forms of a linear equation. Here, make sure if you have a graph, you can find the equation of the line. Go back and label this if that's not already in the title of your notes for that section. Given the slope and a point, find the equation of a line. Do the same thing. Go back in your notes, find it. Write the equation of a vertical or horizontal line. Given the graph of a line, find the x and y-intercepts. And finally, given the equation of a line, find the x and y-intercepts. These are the 6 skills that you need to know from this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope it wasn't too long. I'll see you guys in class.